Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing Dashat Company using the Holo Projector special rule as part of a channel supporter request versus USAriadna, and the scenario is Supply Raid. Supply Raid is a custom scenario. I'll link it in the video description and pinned comment below, but in short it's a custom scenario being played at Burn City Brawl, which is happening in Melbourne, Australia on 7th and 8th of September. The idea of Supply Raid is that you have a field 3x3, so 9 possible mission objectives that you're trying to tag and activate, and if you keep them activated for an entire turn, they will lift off and be yours at the beginning of your next turn after you activate them. As the game progresses, certain other things happen. For example, obviously you can't tag them in round 3. There are rules that account for that. We'll go through that at the beginning of the game. It's a very interesting scenario. Since I first saw it, I've wanted to play it for a little while now. This is my first chance to do so. And sitting down to write a list for it, it's hit a real sweet spot, which is that I don't know if there's strictly an optimal way to play it. There are a few possible opportunities and methods you might use for how you time your approach to the scenario, but you do have to think about how you approach the scenario because there are 9 possible objectives to accomplish. So it's very cool, it's very interesting, and I think it very neatly threads the needle between interesting, engaging, and an active mission without being overcomplicated. So again, you'll see the full rules for it. They'll be in the video description and pinned comment. You can take a look there. Otherwise, we'll run through it before we begin the game. Now, our viewer request for today's list is to try using the Holo Projector rule. Crabsy92, channel supporter, has made the request to just play a battle report using a Holo Projector, and they note not necessarily using a Hassassin AR, although it would be cool. I haven't used a Hassassin AR, although it might have been cool. We're doing something with Dashat Company instead. Now, just to speak for a moment about Holo Mask and Holo Projector, because they're fairly conjoined rules. I don't think there's ever been any rule in Infinity that has had a larger number of people say, oh, I've had this really cool idea for how you might use this special rule, and then the really cool idea requires on you either A, actively cheating, or B, not knowing how the rule works, which is kind of an indictment of the combination, but Holo Projector in particular. How Holo Projector works is at the beginning of the game, and then subsequently throughout the game, you can have decoys in place. You can start with up to 2 decoys placed in the Holo Projector area. They are called your Holo Echoes, or they are your Holo Projected models. They look and deploy and behave exactly like troopers until you go to move, at which point all of the troopers move at once and prompt AROs and are arrowed against normally, with the big utility, of course, being that an enemy trooper in ARO can only make 1 ARO no matter how many models they see. So if you have 3 troopers in a Holo Projector state, so it's 1 trooper that is Holo projecting 2 echoes, and all of them come around a corner and all of them look at an enemy and all of them duck back, that doesn't do anything because your enemy is allowed to hold. It's treated as equivalent to a marker state for purposes of delaying your ARO, so your opponent just holds against you. Or if you try and use it to cross a gap, you move, for example, well, it still isn't actually a marker state, so your opponent is allowed to declare a ballistic skill attack against you, so you have a chance to get shot if you try and use it for a gap closing tool, so it doesn't really necessarily work that way either. In fact, there's a lot of things that it looks like maybe it should be able to do, but in order to prevent it from being an overpowered game mechanic, it has a lot of restrictions baked into it. Now, hypothetically, you might be able to use it for something like a shell game, but the thing about Infinity N4, probably also N5, which has been announced recently, is that there is a 15 trooper limit, which really constrains the amount of information you can conceal if you are playing, for example, vanilla Hackislam or Hassassins, and you deploy an absolute ton of Dalamis with Panzerfausts. Your opponent will go, well, that's 17 troops, so not all of them are real. So I know that there's going to be a Holo projected model somewhere, and I can make some rough guesses about what they might be, because I can sort of take a look at how things are deployed, and oh look, there's a clump of 3 Dalamis all within each of each other. I wonder if that's a Hassassin AR. Now that's kind of an example where I am leading toward a conclusion where, okay, yes, your opponent can guess what's going on, but it's just worth noting that Holo Projector as a rule is often going to be much more limited than you would think, particularly if you are following all of the rules around properly revealing public information. For example, this list contains 17 troops. So if you do want to use it, particularly for that kind of like deployment phase shell game idea, there are basically 2 ways to approach it. The first is to use it to conceal the presence of hidden deployment troops. Now, I don't use hidden deployment or drop troops nearly as much as I should. They're very good and powerful rules. I am just addicted to having the maximum possible number of bodies and orders on the field at the beginning of the game as I can. But if you, for example, were playing Vanilla Hack Islam and you had a drop troop and a Hassassin Nadir and you had those models hidden, and then you used something like maybe even a Bashi Bazook, because points start getting a little hinky if you try and use an AR for this, as just a couple of extra troopers deployed somewhat believably, then you're using that first and greatest of rules of deception, which is that if you want to conceal something, show your opponent what they expect to see. So in N4, typically speaking, you will expect to see 15 troopers. The absence of a trooper against that 15 trooper limit kind of reveals that something might be concealed. So you show them 15 troopers so that they have, confirmed what it is that they expect to see and therefore don't suspect the arrival of a Hassassin Rajik and the reveal of a Hassassin Nadir, for example. The other way you can use holo projector is to telegraph the presence of holo projecting, but not telegraph, basically change how many holo echoes you choose to deploy to make it look as though you might have something concealed when you don't and have your opponent jumping at shadows. And that is what this list is attempting to do. Now, the Lu Duan in Vanilla Yuching, for example, there's not a lot that it can kind of believably echo as and create any kind of a fog of war. But in Dashat Company, we have access to some quite good quality Silhouette 4 models in the presence of Coom Riders. And so in this list, in Combat Group 2, we have a Lu Duan that at the beginning of the game is going to deploy just one additional echo, one additional projected model. It's going to use Hollow Mask to pretend to be a Coom Rider with light shotgun, smoke grenades, and DACW, deploying non-impetuous. And it will place an echo of that, which will appear to be real, and it will deploy near an actual and real Coom Rider. So my opponent will be like, oh, how many troopers do you have? Well, I can see 16 troopers, and of those 16, 3 of them are suspiciously clustered Coom Riders, which are Silhouette 4 models, which is the same silhouette as a Lu Duan. If I assume that those three Coom Riders are in fact one Lu Duan, oh well, now you only have 14 troops. Something is different. Something is not what I expected, and I will be aware of that. Now, in fact, I'm just using less than the maximum number of echoes. You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to deploy up to 3. You can certainly deploy 2, so yourself and the real one and the projected model. And frankly, with deployment zone real estate being what it is, I don't have space for more than that anyway. This list is also running a Magariba Guard, for example, and there's only so much deployment zone space you have when you have models that are this fat. So it's just a small and interesting way to make use of Hollow Mask for the purposes of meeting this viewer request. As noted, I don't think Holo Projector is a particularly useful ability. Holo Mask is occasionally useful from time to time. It's nice when you're looking to conceal pieces or maybe fake out the presence of certain things. I've seen Holo Mask used in a useful kind of obfuscatory way many times. The Holo Projector never, particularly in N4 where we have such firm troop limits, you have 15 troopers, no more, rarely less. It's so easy to puzzle out what is real and what is not when you have such a firm piece of information to base your assessments on. But we're doing our best with this. So in terms of the list otherwise, it's a good mix of Dashat Company good stuff. So we've got in Combat Group 1, 2 Libertos, Mimetism -3, Light Shotgun Mine Layer. We have McMurra, we have Valeria Gromos, a Zuyong Tactical Awareness, and then just a Bounty Hunter. Would be nice to have a Digger in that Haris team. It's a 3-person team, but the Diggers are being used elsewhere. We then have a Magariba Guard. I would like to have upgraded it to the 85-point profile, but we did not have the points in this list, so it's just the 81-point profile, and the pistol would be very good this game. It's going to be duoed with a Digger. We then have 2 Fanus remotes. Then in Combat Group 2, because Supply Raid is a scenario that has Forward Observer bonuses, which is very, very rare, like unknown otherwise in ITS, things like Forward Observer remotes are actually really good and really useful. So we have, in this case, the Dashat Company Red Fury Forward Observer remote. It will also be duoed with a Digger. As noted, we then have the Lu Duan and a Coom Raider, and then a lone Ghulam Lieutenant. Now, this is kind of just a risk that I sort of had to take. I don't really think it's necessarily a great idea to have such a telegraphed lieutenant, especially in a faction that is going to be spending lots of its command tokens to convert irregular orders regular in any case. You don't have the fat to just play through lots of lieutenant turn, and I would be very close to being punished for that this game, as we will see. Ultimately, wouldn't be, but that was more for lack of dice than anything else. If I could find points, I would seriously consider exchanging that Ghulam Lieutenant. Not necessarily exchanging that Ghulam Lieutenant for anything, but having just a decoy somewhere. Maybe if I was using a Holo Echo model, for example. But it's it's the limitation we're working under with 15 troopers, and the all of the points we're spending on everything else. I did not have 4 points available to turn, say, one of those Fenus remotes into a decoy Ghulam. It just is what it is. Otherwise, look, this is not optimized for the scenario, although the Rafik would do great work. But it is a Dashat company list that could feasibly play just about any scenario if it needed to, and as requested, it has Holo Echo and Holo Projector and Holo Mask as rules available that it's intending to try and exploit. Now, playing against me today, we have the USAriadna Ranger Force. My opponent for today, Nick, has had his stuff off getting painted, and it's all arrived back. You saw it in the splash screen at the beginning of the video, and it looks very, very nice. Nick is running basically a solid selection of USAriadna good stuff. We have in the first... Now, this is approximate. I've reconstructed his list. It is what he played. I'm not 100% on the combat groups, just kind of doing my best there, but this is broadly how he laid his army out. So in combat group 1, we have a 5-person pure grunt core. We have a grunt with ballistic skill, attack, shock, AP sniper rifle +1 damage. It's the only firepower piece in that link, but it is a piece that has served Nick very well in the past. It was this grunt, for example, that once killed my avatar. I think in active turn, I positioned the avatar unwisely, not having realized at the time, this was back in the day, I had not realized that in the shift from N3 to N4, this grunt got a real glow up, and it got a real glow up. So this is AP Sniper Rifle, +1 damage, so it's damage 16, armor piercing, and shock. A grunt does not have fantastic stats, but it's at the head of a core link, it has decent armor, and has a 1-1-2 behind it, so it's a serviceable firepower piece for a pretty low points cost. We then have a Grunt Lieutenant Rifle Grenade Launcher. The grenade launcher adds speculative fire into the list. It's nice to have. Again, it's got +3 ballistic skill from the core link with full composition bonuses. That's going to get you to ballistic skill 14, which is basically the point at which the grenade launcher becomes, if not ideal, then usable. Any lower than that, and you really are just throwing dice hoping that something sticks. But if you're able to land on, say, an 8, for example, that gives you enough of a chance to roll a few dice and have a decent chance. We then have a Blackjack APHMG, great profile, relatively cheap. It's not outstanding in its field, but there's only so much you can ask for 38 points when you're getting full APHMG firepower. Then we have a Devil Dog K9 Antipode and an Airborne Ranger Forward Observer Submachine Gun Flash Pulse and Decharges. I really like this as a pick. Remember what I said before about obfuscation, and one of the things you can do that's very valuable is to show your opponent what they expect to see. Well, if you're playing USAriadna, one of the most fearsome things you can put in your list is Roger Van Zant. He's a deployment zone parachutist with dogged and he's good CC, good enough shooting. He's an absolute terror of a piece if you aren't expecting him to come. Now, obviously in Infinity N4, 15 trooper limit means that, particularly with a list that has profiles that are as cheap as USAriadna, the way you can tell if there's an airborne ranger of some description coming is if the USAriadna player has taken only 14 troops. Now, some factions with similar pieces, like Morats, for example, Morats can actually just spend to a point where they really only have 14 troops worth of points to allocate in any case, so they just take 14 troops, they leave the 15th slot vacant, and they let you stew about whether or not they have a Rassiat or not. They just leave that living in your head rent-free. USAriadna can't really do that because, frankly, their profiles are all too cheap. There are a few expensive profiles in the game in USAriadna, and we can basically see all of them in this list. But to get to 300 points, you're pretty much going to have to take 15 troopers. But you don't have to take Roger Van Zant to get to 15 troopers and still leave your opponent able to stew about the risk he poses. You can just take in a USAriadna Airborne Ranger. That uses up your last 20 points. And it's still a perfectly serviceable piece. It's dangerous, particularly if it gets into CC. It's got a submachine gun. It's a specialist. Forward observers in this scenario are quite useful. And as soon as Nick deploys, I'm going to see that there's only 14 things on the table, and I'm going to go, well, I have to account for the possibility of Van Zant. Now, I can't not, right? I cannot look at a USAriadna player that has deployed 14 troops and not go, oh, I'll just ignore the risk of Van Zant. Like, I must take that seriously, which shifts how I deploy. It pulls resources back into my like further into my deployment zone, so I'm watching my deployment zone table edges, and that's something that like doesn't have a massive impact on the game, but it has a small one. It pulls repeaters away from like my immediate deployment zone line. And this is all small benefit that you get by presenting your opponent something that they might expect to see, but not actually playing into the thing they're specifically expecting to have to defend against. A US Ranger is totally reasonable. It's a good little piece, and by taking it, you also get to make your opponent stress about one of the game's best parachutist deployment zones. Now, in Combat Group 2, approximately, we then have a 3-person Harris team. This is a spicy one, which I do really appreciate. The Unknown Ranger and then 2 Mavericks. One of them is submachine gun light rocket launcher, and one of them is AP Spitfire. I am not 100% certain this is necessarily the best Harry's team that you might possibly assemble, but on the other hand, the Unknown Ranger is kind of fast at 6'2", and Mavericks are just serviceable on their own merits. There's nothing wrong with them. All of these pieces, actually, and this is kind of fun, is that the Unknown Ranger and each of those Mavericks is fine on their own merits. So by taking them all together, you just get the Harry's bonuses and get to move them forward by themselves without really giving up anything. In this scenario in particular, I would probably have exchanged the Maverick SMG light rocket launcher for a Forward Observer Maverick. I don't know offhand how the price differential there works out. It might be cheaper, it might be more expensive, I'm not sure. It would have been very good in this scenario because of how good Forward Observers are. But just in general, I don't know if I recommend this, but it's a very fun idea. We then have 2 Foxtrot FOs. Speaking of things that are good in this scenario, you really couldn't ask for a better specialist, regular, and a Forward Observer in a scenario that likes Forward Observers. This is a case where they will really come into their own. Very, very useful. We then have a Beast Hunter Mine Layer, one of only 2 irregular pieces in the army. Very easy to accommodate a second irregular. And for 9 points, you get basically a great little defensive deal that might be able to do something offensive if it needs to. It gives you the mine layer, it gives you a mine in your deployment zone, it gives you a Panzerfaust if you need it, serviceable for 9 points. Finally, we have a Grunt Infiltration Heavy Flamethrower Light Shotgun. These things, just nice, just 11 points to chuck a dude that's armor 3 with a heavy flamethrower and a shotgun somewhere up against the midfield where he will be annoying. Really one of the only things keeping these guys from being utterly oppressive is the fact that you can't take 100 of them, so fair enough, maybe the 15 trooper limitation has some utility, I suppose, keeping the USAriadna player down. Overall, this is a solid, well-rounded list that's packing plenty of firepower, lots of armor-piercing firepower in particular, and just a nice mix of offensive things. It's also doing one of the things that I really like it when a list can do this, which is it's got basically nothing that's only a cheerleader. The closest thing to just a cheerleader you might see in this list is some of the grunts in the Link team, but grunts are fine. They're dangerous, they're difficult, well, not dangerous, but they're difficult to kill, they're kind of frustrating, they're very efficiently costed, and they are force multiplying that AP sniper rifle. So really there's nothing in this list that is wasted space. There's nothing like a dude that is just there to generate an order, which means you have 15 troopers that can all potentially be active, even the Beast Hunter, for example, which is nice. I like that in a list. I like making maximum use of all of your spaces, and this list is doing that. Now, let's very briefly talk supply raid. It is a slightly complicated scenario that makes a lot of sense once you understand it and actually go to play it. On the table, we can see that there are 9 tech coffins. They are arranged in a grid. You can see them sort of like, one here, one here, one here, and so they go. So we have 9 of these tech coffins. Tech coffins can be interacted with to begin with only one way. You can mark them for airlift. So you do that by moving a specialist into base contact. You attempt to activate the tech coffin, and once activated, a tech coffin remains activated until the enemy player activates it themselves, in which case control flips, or you begin a turn with an activated tech coffin. Any tech coffin before the use of command tokens that you begin the turn having activated flies off into space. It's extracted from the battlefield, and you score it. It's going to be one of the boxes that you score. Now, you can activate a tech coffin anytime in the first or second turns. Once you hit the third turn, you can no longer activate them, and all tech coffins become locked. This leads us into the second way you can interact with a tech coffin. Against a tech coffin that has been activated by your opponent, Or from the third round, you can also attack tech coffins in close combat using anti-material CCWs. They have the usual defense system rule, although you can bypass that by just using the place deployable skill with decharges. And if you destroy a tech coffin, structure 2, armor 4, BTS 6, then they will drop their supply box, at which point you can engage with the supply box by just picking it up. So you can also score supply boxes that way. So there are 9 total supply boxes on the battlefield. In the beginning of the game, you will be just lifting them off into space. But then over time, you will shift to attempting to destroy them and take the goodies within, and then attempt to hold those until the end of the game. So in terms of scoring, you will get a maximum of 6 points for each supply box that you have either secured or launched. So you can secure or launch up to 6. There are 9 obviously on the table. If you get all 9, you'll still only get 6 points. 1 point for having launched more supply boxes, 1 point for having destroyed more supply boxes, and then 2 classified objectives. So fairly neat and clean scoring, and kind of just like a cool way of interacting with the scenario, where it's firstly incorporates kind of like the tug of war, right? Because once you activate something, it has to stay activated through to your next turn. So activating something puts your opponent on a timer, but then your opponent has multiple ways to respond to that. They can, for example, respond by just activating their own tech coffins, or they can respond by attempting to reactivate your one, which will then put it on a timer where their next turn it will exfiltrate. Or they can attempt to destroy it, which will drop the supply crate, but then anyone can pick up and take the supply crate, so they have to get it to safety. So there are all of these different ways that you can attempt to engage with the scenario. For example, if my opponent, Nick, in this case, he's going to be deploying on the left side, if he was to get a whole bunch of his boxes early, I probably wouldn't attempt to cross the field and decharge or slap them in close combat with DA weapons, because that would just drop the supply boxes on Nick's part of the table, and I wouldn't necessarily be able to, he would possibly be able to just take those. So instead, I'd probably be more incentivized to try and take control of them and activate the consoles myself to sort of like reset that timer. But then that has its own issues. How do I spend my orders that way? They're close to Nick's deployment zone, so maybe he can easily take them back. And so you have lots of tension around how you can spend your orders, but importantly, you can spend your orders in lots of different ways. And there have been other scenarios that have handled this well. For example, the scenario in the last season, I actually forget the name, but it was Cryo something. I don't think we ever actually figured out what the optimal way to play that scenario was, where it had the quadrants and the 4 consoles, and you were trying to activate them, but as you activated them, some would become real and they would disappear until you ended up with 2 areas that you had to try and claim. Like that was a complicated scenario, and it was complicated enough that we never really necessarily figured out. I think the optimal way to play that varied, frankly, from army to army, which is good, but it was like a kind of maximum level of complexity that you can realistically get into ITS. This is a fan-made mission, but it's doing a very good job of really quite cleanly showing you how you're meant to interact with it and letting you discover that through the course of the game. I enjoyed this a lot, actually. I would be very keen to just have this be part of the ITS pack or used in missions locally. And so, again, I will link it in the video description and pinned comment below if you're interested in it yourself and would like to play it. Comes with my significant recommendation. Now, let's actually get into the game. I'm rolling whip 14 Lieutenant with my Ghulam. Nick is rolling whip 12, but Nick wins the roll and identifies basically that there's not necessarily... Supply Raid has some advantages to being second player, but it isn't really a go second scenario, so he elects to go first, very reasonably. I'm going to pick the right table side, not for any particular reason other than I was mostly there, but I felt like some of the deployment zones were a bit more comfortably defensible, so I'm setting up on the right. Nick is going to deploy first. Obviously, I have to deploy my QAZ creature first. My QAZ creature is going to end up in this building over here, and it's going to be just sort of positioned in like a little nook here where it can cover all of these approaches to my deployment zone, and also totally cover this tech coffin here. For Nick's part, his QAZ creature is going to go down here. It's just short enough that it's behind this car, so it can be shot from, say, this angle here, but it's basically going to be safe, and it's going to be pretty aggressively projecting that 8-inch zone of control for its guard AROs. Now, a quick note on the table. At Nick's suggestion, how we're playing this one is this is a single level table where the buildings all have open interiors, so we've taken the roofs off, and they can be moved through fairly easily. The buildings are see into or out of but not through, and the windows are muddy. A muddy window is one that cannot be seen through unless you are in base contact with it. So doors, you can see into a building, for example, this door here. you could see into the building through the door, but a model that was up against the window, you could see and be seen if you're up against the window, but if you backed away from the window, you would only now be able to see through the doors. This is just how we play this table. It's a nice mix of visibility and lack of visibility. But it does tend to create a table that is very easy to move around and through because the windows are large enough for most models to squeeze through. So I wouldn't always recommend playing games of Infinity this way. When you have this kind of like lower level urban environment, if you can move through the buildings very easily, but the buildings block line of sight, it can really allow for significant close assault opportunities, which I like, but you can balance that, or you have to balance that, by also adding some reasonably wide and lengthy lanes of fire. So Nick has set his grunt link up in this building here. They'll be moving up in relatively short order to watch these windows and watch these long-ish lanes of fire. And then over here we have the two Mavericks. The Unknown Ranger will be deploying with them as the reserve. The Beast Hunter is going down over here, and the Devil Dog and Antipode are deploying with him. Otherwise, we have camouflage markers, mimetism -3, basically in near base contact with each of these two tech coffins, which are very obviously foxtrots, and at some point during the game they're going to reveal and mark those things for airlift. Finally, the Blackjack has gone down over here. It's prone, but it'll be able to stand up and move early in the game if it needs to. Now, that is only, that's before he reserve drops the Unknown Ranger. That's 13 pieces, so I'm immediately like, well, cool, I'm now aware that there is the possibility of Van Zant, so I have to deploy to defend against Van Zant, and I adopt my deployment zone accordingly. In this case, that means that I've pulled the Fugazi back. Normally, against even like Ariadna, technically speaking, the army that Nick is playing has one hackable model, but even against Ariadna, Spotlight is still a useful ARO, even if you have guided missiles, because +3 to hit is good. But in this case, I'm going to pull the Fanus remotes back to watch the table edges. Van Zant has Dogged, but he is BTS 0, so if I just have flash pulses bracketing my table edges, then it's a little bit of defense against Roger Van Zant. In case he turns up, he might get stunned, and I'll be able to deal with him in my turn. It's not a perfect defense, and it requires me to pull valuable pieces that would be projecting repeater networks forward. It requires me to pull them back, but it's as good as I can do under the circumstances. So we're going to deploy the little 3-person Haris team with the Authorized Bounty Hunter who rolls up a HMG. Never fires it, but it's nice when I do that. Authorized Bounty Hunter, Valyria Gromors, and the Zuyong are going to be deployed around here. The Gulam will be deployed in this nook here, but it's going to be watching these table edges, and other pieces will be watching its back. We then have the 3 Coom Riders deployed in this kind of a space here. So we have this Coom Rider is fake. It's just a hollow project. The Lewd one is back here within 8 inches, and then this is the real Coom Rider. So they're all deployed in a position where it's sort of like, ooh, that's kind of obviously a hollow echo setup. Yes, it is. This is the real Coom Rider, this is the Lewd one, and then this is the fake. And the fake will draw fire. I'm hoping that it will draw fire, and it does draw fire on Nick's first turn. We then have our first Libertos mine layer deployed in this building. The Libertos is knocked away safely, and the mine is able to explode out through the doorway here if it needs to. And then we have the second Libertos mine layer over here. Same deal. This Libertos is safely ensconced inside the building, and then the mine is covering the approach to the Magariba. The Magariba is going to be duoed with a digger, which is back here watching the table edge. McMurray is deployed in this building here. This is a little bit of a misdeployment. I really should have read the situation that Nick was going to move his grunt sniper up to this window, at which point he's got a line all the way down through there. So McMurray actually ends up getting pinned on the first turn, but he'll be able to make his way out later in the game. Then we have the Red Fury Rafik duoed with the second digger over here. These are just lightweight little duos, but it's kind of fun to run 2 duos and a Haris team as your link setup, and they would do good work. Now, the Magariba Guard is my reserve drop, and it does end up going down where it is there. And specifically what I'm looking to do is to try and pin these Devil Dogs back a little bit, but Nick is having none of that. So Nick begins his first turn, and the assault begins. Now, what he is kind of expecting is that, yes, I might ARO against the Devil Dog. The Devil Dog will be able to throw smoke on 19s, and it's total immune just against the explosive round. But I do not intend to shoot the Devil Dog. The Magariba Guard instead wings a shot into the Antipode, hits it, and explodes it. And if you're ever fighting against Devil Dogs, that is something I recommend doing. They are one of the more dangerous of Ariadna's rapid offensive unit heavy warband pieces, but they're dangerous because there's 2 bodies that get all the benefits of the synchronized peripheral in close combat and everything like that, in addition to the utility you get from the Antipode, for example, having sensor. As soon as you kill the Antipode, the Devil Dog becomes I mean, good, right? It's a good model, but it's not any better than any other of the similar kind of dog warriors, and it's honestly worse than most of them. It's the antipode that makes it such great value as a pair, and if you just get a shot against the antipode, take it, because now it's less dangerous in close combat. It isn't getting all of those peripheral bonuses. It just triages the damage significantly. Nevertheless, forward he gets, the antipode dies, and then he sets up for an attack run on sort of this position here. So most of the work this turn is going to be done by the Unknown Ranger team and by the Devil Dog, and they're going to collectively push forward up and around in this sort of position here, and what they're looking to do is suppress and ideally destroy the Mega Reaper Guard and get some boxes pressed. So on the way through, the Unknown Ranger is going to activate this console here. They'll move up and around in this direction. They will attempt to activate this console here, although I think the Unknown Ranger will fail. He's not a forward observer, so he gets no bonus, just whip 13. And then the assault will begin. And the assault happens in like a few different phases. The Devil Dog is going to go into combat against the Mega Reaper at some point, but basically Nick knows he will need smoke to make that attack. And although the Mavericks have MSVs, he wants to attack with them first. So the attack sort of like launches in this position here. The Maverick comes out, tries to stay outside of 8 inches. There's a slight misjudgment in terms of positioning here, and the Maverick does still ends up in range to detonate the mine, and the mine unfortunately will kill it, but at burst 5, the Maverick puts a full volley into the Mega Reaper Guard and does 1 wound to it. But with the APS Spitfire Maverick's death and orders running out, Nick attempts again to activate this tech coffin and fails again, and that's basically all that he can do with the Unknown Rangers team. Having moved forward, press some buttons, this was the group that I stripped orders from using my command token. So that's fine, the Devil Dog's going to finish what the rest of the team started. This mine has been cleared now, so he comes around this way, hocks smoke into the alleyway, and then moves up and forward. Mega Reaper Guard attempts a dodge but fails, and so on the second order, the Devil Dog moves into close combat under smoke and declares a CC attack with the Mega Reaper Guard. Now, at this point, narratively speaking, what I like to imagine happens is that the Mega Reaper Guard pilot panic accelerates, and we hear that horrible thump, whoomp, whoomp, whoomp kind of noise. And the Mega Reaper Guard radios over radio to tell everyone that she thinks she's hit something, because she has crit the Devil Dog in close combat, 2 hits, damage 17 with her tag strength CCW, and the Devil Dog goes to unconscious. That's really bad for Nick. Like, that's really, really bad for Nick. The Devil Dog without its peripheral is still a good chance to slowly wear the Mega Reaper Guard down. It has a good CC score, it has an armor-piercing close combat weapon, it has high strength. It will wear through her eventually, unless she crits and deals 2 wounds to it and knocks it unconscious. And so this is a grim, basically, ending to the turn for Nick. He has got some runs on the board in terms of he's got 1 activated console, but he hasn't activated the others. He hasn't really had the orders to do so. And the attack on the Mega Reaper Guard has caused more damage to his army than it has to mine. With the Maverick down, and especially with the Devil Dog and its antipode destroyed, this is a rough turn. You do not like to have offensive turns in Infinity where you bloody your own nose trying to punch your opponent, and that's sort of what's happened here. The best Nick can do is to activate the Beast Hunter and move out and around to try and pin the Mega Reaper Guard down. Maybe it will do well in ARO, but this is a little bit rough. Now, there is still a strong defensive position here. There's the Infiltrating Grunt, there's going to be the other of the 2 Mavericks, there's going to be the Unknown Ranger, but Nick has not activated other buttons, for example, and that gives me, particularly the fact that the Foxtrots didn't activate to activate this tech console and this tech coffin and this tech coffin. The fact that the only tech coffin Nick has activated is here gives me like a pretty clean line of attack. If I can take out everything in this space, then I'm in a good position to secure my own scenario advantage and start moving the scenario forward in my way. Now, there are a few ways as we begin our turn that we do this. We've got a full order pool to do so. We can't move McMurray out because the sniper team has moved up to occupy this window and is staring out across the table. But there are attacks that we can make moving backwards and forwards between our combat groups to do damage and progress the scenario. The first thing we'll do is we'll have the Mega Reaper Guard pull back this direction and shoot the Beast Hunter, and she will put it down and kill it. She's burst 4 on 11s, it's burst 1 on 11s, it doesn't crit or anything like that. Down it goes, drops unconscious. I then have a think about using her to engage the Grunt Sniper before, thankfully, common sense prevails. Now, I've been playing an awful lot of Conquest recently because we had a Worlds event that I was practicing for. I'm getting back to Infinity now. I'm enjoying it. And I brushed the rust off with a game of Assassins versus Toha last week, which at my opponent's request was not a battle report. But frankly, I'm kind of glad it wasn't anyway, because I had forgotten how miserable it was trying to use Assassin for days to take out symbiomated ARO pieces. Instead, I failed at that and then spent a whole bunch of time using Asawira to completely fail to hurt a Nickel sniper. It was a rough game, and so this time, fortunately speaking, the rush had been brushed off a little bit, and I thought better about how we can actually unpick the problems in front of us. And the answer, as it so often is in Dashat Company, was fish-shaped. So this Libertos over here, rather than try to engage the sniper on Nick's terms effectively, like the Mega Reaper Guard is favored against that sniper, but it's not favored by that much. And if I fail and I start taking wounds, it's really bad for me. I have no engineer, right? Whereas that grunt is a 20-point piece. But the Libertos is a cure to a multitude of ills, and it's easy to move around this table, particularly because there's this nice wide open space here. So the Libertos just moves out and forward, and Nick, unfortunately, at this point is caught in a bit of a Sophie's Choice situation. There's nothing else that can see the Libertos. The only model that can see it is the sniper, and even the sniper can only see it as I come out around this corner and start moving forward. So he has to basically declare Discover, or else just hold and hold and hold until I get in range to hit everything. I say Discover and hope. If he declares Discover now, I'm going to lay 2 templates onto him. He's got about a 1 in 4 chance of surviving that. But if he survives that, he's in a good position to then stop the Libertos before the damage gets any worse. Doesn't happen that way. He goes for the Discover roll. I place 2 templates. The grunt goes unconscious, and the Libertos is free to proceed. Now, I do have to continue to push this attack because there is a doctor right behind the grunt, and I do not want that grunt to stand back up. It's too annoying to have that kind of quality ARO piece present. So the Libertos continues its push around and basically just hears Johnny its face through the window. Every grunt in the Link team can see it. I consider splitting my templates, but what is more important is to kill either the doctor or the grunt sniper. So both templates go into this little team over here. They catch 3 of the 5, and I think they put down one or two of the things that they hit. They kill the grunt sniper, they kill the 112. Yes, they kill the grunt riflewoman behind them, and then the Libertos absolutely explodes. It cops like multiple rifle hits, 2 flamethrower AROs, etc. It goes all the way to dead, but it's just killed or dropped unconscious 3 of the grunt link, including the doctor. Great success. With the sniper down, I'm now relatively free to move, and so the Rafik Digger duo begin to move up. They're in one combat group, and then the Magariba Guard begins to move up and around as well. And this is basically where we do see the merits of the 81-point Magariba Guard. Because it's got a Burst 3 heavy pistol, it can take up close assault duties if it needs to. Now, the 85-point Magariba Guard has a heavy flamethrower and a pistol, and so, you can kind of push your opponents to dodge. It's not bad. But for 81 points is still too expensive for the Magariba, but as the recent Pan-Oceanian tanks have shown us, having a Burst 3 close-range gun with tag ballistic skill is by no means bad. And so between these various different pieces, the Digger that's moving up with the Rafik, the Digger that's moving up with the Magariba herself, we basically clean out everything that's in this space. We are not able to push far enough forward to activate this tech coffin, but we do activate these 2 with the Rafik on the way through, and that's basically a good turn. So if we jump forward to the beginning of the next turn, at the beginning of next turn, this tech coffin here lifts off into space, securing Nick 1 point, but I've got these 2 tech coffins here marked, and there's sort of like where Nick's strong point once existed in this space, and now I have all of my stuff here instead. And this is, if we look at just the order count, Nick's in a rough spot at the beginning of this turn. Because he sustained casualties attacking me, and he sustained casualties from the counterattack, I'm down all of a Libertos at this point, and Nick's Grunt Core has been gutted, his Harris has been completely destroyed, his Antipode is dead, his Beast Hunter is dead. That's a pretty rough turn. Now, he still has a plan. He has a theory of victory, a way forward, and that is to now at this point play the scenario. So there are a few things that are going to happen that will attempt to bail Nick out of the game. The first is that there will be a few spec fires. He's going to attempt to spec fire my lieutenant. I think if he'd done this, he would have needed to spend orders to get further into range. But there's a good argument that he should probably have just gone for this helpful leather on the first turn. Like literally just spend every available order spec firing the LT until it's dead, and then use every other available order pressing buttons to have them lift off in a manner that I can't respond to. I think if you play this scenario and you have like a clean line to inflict loss of lieutenant, you can use the space that loss of lieutenant creates to create a huge amount of forward scenario advantage. As it was just a little bit too difficult to get within 24 inches with the grunt and do other things, so it didn't happen that way. But I think if Nick had pursued that line of play, it could potentially have paid dividends, with the big caveat that no plan that relies on spec fire and rolling eights is ever going to be truly reliable. If it had whiffed, he'd have done nothing with the first turn. Still, he's going to attempt to dig his way out this turn, and he's going to be able to activate both of these buttons and this one here with his foxtrots. The other thing that he's going to do is he's going to bring that airborne ranger on back here, just out of frame, and then move up and around this way, and then aggressively push at the Magariba. And this is where we see one of the downsides of this kind of Magariba profile, which is that it has no template weapon. And so this Ranger literally just runs at her, firing its submachine gun, and it puts her all the way to unconscious. She, like, the first hit, she takes a wound, she guts like a little bit forward into this cover position, and then he continues to push forward, and she misses again. And after some back and forth fighting, she goes unconscious. So the Magariba guard does go down, not dead, but she does go down, which is going to obviously take a little bit of the wind out of my sails, but otherwise, like, Nick has to push the scenario forward. He'd have been in a good position. He used the lieutenant order and like one spare regular order to drop a couple of grenades on my Ghulam lieutenant's head, but he did not land them in this particular case. Without the link bonuses, he's only rolling fives to hit, and with like 2 or 3 shots, he just doesn't quite get there. Does take the Magariba guard down though, and does activate 3 consoles, which then puts me on a timer to try and recover them. So at the beginning of my turn, these two will lift off into space, giving me 2 consoles to Nick's 1. And then we have a few things that we try and do. One of the first things we're going to do is that the pilot will hop out of the Magariba guard, lean around this flower bed, and fire a Medi Dart at the antipode, which hits and gets me the classified that requires you to shoot a medikit at an enemy trooper. And then, mostly out of spite, she will continue to move around with her shotgun, and she will put down the USAriadna Ranger, and she actually survives the shot back. She just double template, he shoots and misses, and she hits him and kills him. So sweet, sweet revenge there. Otherwise, I have a lot of force in this position here, and it's not really positioned to move out and across the battlefield, right? I don't really have a good way to get in on this objective here or this objective here. So what I'm going to settle for is just attempting to mark maybe these 2 ones here and here. And for that, we're going to use the Haris team with Valeria Gromos. So they will move out and around. They will, the Blackjack it was previously in suppressive fire and it's moved into this building, so we're relatively safe to progress. But Whip 14, no specialist benefits. It takes her a little bit of time. It takes her a bit of time to get this button pressed. And it takes basically all of the rest of my orders to move over and press this button as well, although I do get both of these done. However, that's basically the entirety of the turn. I'm wary of doing anything else. I know that Nick is going to be close-ish to loss of lieutenant, and I do not want, if the turn ends now, if you put your opponent at loss of lieutenant in this scenario, you could really hard throw the game, because there will be no further opportunities for any boxes that you mark to be extracted. So I had to balance that quite carefully. So I left most of the rest of Nick's army alive, but I was able to flip those 2 consoles. So this one, and this one extract, which means Nick has extracted at this point 3, and I have extracted 2. Now, at this juncture, the second element of the scenario kicks in. I believe in the document it's called the EI Retaliates, but because we're now heading into the 3rd turn, this is the point where people won't get the turns that they would otherwise need to mark and extract tech coffins. So from here on out, it's strictly, if you want access to the tasty supplies inside, you have to blow them up. Nick does not have a lot of stuff left that he can do, not realistically. He's going to make some aggressive plays, he's going to continue to attempt to spec fire, but there's not enough time or weight left in the scenario. He's extracted 3 boxes himself. By the beginning of my next turn, I will have 4, which alone, plus the classified I've done, would put me in the winning position. But he can basically attempt to keep it at that. He can attempt to secure as many, to build as much space for him as possible, to put him as in the best chance he might have of staying inside the the smallest possible margin of defeat. But unfortunately, I think 3 grenade shots later, and he's still not able to drop any grenades on the head of my lone Ghulam lieutenant. And that basically lets us round the rest of the game out with these two tech coffins getting extracted into the sky, because I do begin my turn with them activated, and then The rest of the game is just this Zuyong here, who was nominated as my Master Breacher, whatever they're called. He has decharges in any case. He'll move around to here, decharge this one, around to here, decharge this one, and I will pick up the 2 remaining crates, which give me a fairly healthy margin of victory. Nick's got the 3 points for having extracted 3 boxes, but I think I've scored everything else. I haven't done my second classified, which was to get a heavy infantry in zone of control and or line of fire of an enemy, but it would be relatively doable. Regardless, that puts a score as something like approximately 9 or 10 points to about 3 points. Nick couldn't really do his classifieds. They were all rather dependent on veterans or characters, and he never quite had the resources available to aggressively pursue them. So that wraps up the game. That wraps up my first game of Supply Raid, and as noted, I really enjoyed it. I really like that I feel like different armies could play this in different ways, and I think it does a great job of providing like a tug of war style mechanic without that being obscene and obnoxious. As for Hollow Mask and Hollow Echo, did the Lewd one accomplish anything this game? Not nothing. On the second last and last turn, it slowly crept forward up and around over here, and the Mark 12 would be used to put down something that was, I think it killed a grunt. Killed a grunt, it went into suppressive fire. There's a little nifty little trick you can do. So when a model in Hollow with that model with a hollow projector enters suppressive fire, when it then gets its free return to hollow echo state, if it's not being observed at the end of your turn in the states phase, you can then chain out you can place the hollow echoes in base contact with it, and then pick whichever one is real, and all of those hollow echoes copy all of the states that it has. So what that does is, firstly, it produces 3 lewd ones in suppressive fire, and secondly, you have to pick which one is real. And when you consider the size of a lewd one's base, that's actually a fair bit of movement that you get out of just the presence of Hollow Mask moving things around. Now, is the lewd one an outstanding suppressive fire piece? It's not bad. It's ballistic skill 12, it has an MSV 1, and a Mark 12 is a good suppressive fire weapon because it's not like relying on higher burst, it's just a good high damage gun with okay ballistic skill and an MSV 1. Certainly, it would potentially be put down by anything sort of heavier or longer range, but that late in the game, all I needed it to do was sort of stall out this space here so I could safely extract those 2 Tech Coffins, which is what it did. So it got 1 kill, I think just a grunt, and it bought some space for me to secure a couple of Tech Coffins, so it did absolutely fine. Did it do anything that a similar model would not otherwise have done without having to go through all of the Hollow Echo and Hollow Projector shenanigans? Not really. Hollow projector is not, it's just not a particularly good rule. It's got a bunch of restrictions baked into it to prevent it from being oppressive, as I mentioned, and those mean that it really sits in that position of being it's the worst of all worlds. It's not a marker state that prevents you from being shot until you're discovered, but it is a marker state that lets your opponent declare hold AR or delay ARO against you, which means that you are limited coming and going. You can use it to, play a little bit in the way of shell games. You can use it to do a few things that maybe play with your opponent's head a little bit, but really only a little bit. Still, we had a channel supporter request. So look, Crabsy92, I know I didn't accomplish great things with the Hollow Projector model in this game. This was mostly the Magariba song and dance, but we did use one. I talked about it a little bit, and I hope that is at least somewhat satisfying. As always, if you like this video, if you want to support the channel, you can do so either via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. Both really help, both support the channel, and let me continue making videos like this. In terms of content that's coming up, obviously N5 is now anywhere between 2 and 3 months away, but not more, which is a very short window in order to sort of get ready and start thinking about the edition and see what's coming. I don't know what we will see from Corvus Belli. If you are interested in an impressions or prediction video, by all means put that in the comments section. I have a few thoughts about what we might see for N5, but really I don't know any more than anyone else at this point. All I know is what was in the Gen Con seminar video. Still, I would be happy to talk about it, in much the same way I'm happy to take channel supporter requests on basically any topic that spans Infinity or Conquest or Wargaming generally. As always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.